the total communication that's going on, 55% of it is based on nonverbal communication. 38% is based on the way you're using your voice or your tonality, and only 7% are the words that we're using. And so all three of these things are important, and we're going to talk about how we can use all three levels of these communication strategies in order to effectively influence others or motivate someone to take action on a particular request.
Welcome to Change Your Mind, Change Your Life. I'm Jim.
And I'm Lynn. And to our visitors out there, if you're in sales, you'll want to listen to this show. But even if you're not in sales, you still want to listen to this show. Do you need to sell yourself in an interview? Do you need to sell yourself to get that raise or promotion? This is your chance to get valuable tips from a master communicator. John Weir is an award-winning hypnotist who's been helping people to achieve excellence in their lives since 2001. He is a board-certified hypnotist and certified instructor of hypnotism through the National Guild of Hypnotists.
John, welcome to our show. We're honored and delighted to have you back again today.
Yes, we are.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. This is such a privilege and an honor to be back, and I'm really looking forward for the opportunity to share some insights with your audience. I think you both nailed it right on the head. No matter what you do or who you are, everything that we want is going to come from another person. And our ability to communicate and influence others is going to determine what we get out of life, or more of what we really want. And so I'm excited today to break down some ways that we can all get more of what we want from other people and get them to take action. Everything that we're doing is sending different messages of communication to other people. And you were starting to touch on that. We have three different types of communication. We have nonverbal, or the way that we're using our bodies. We have our tonality, or the way we're using our voice, such as pitch, tones, inflection, speed, to deliver a message, and then the words. And if we were to break down these in percentages, the total communication that's going on, 55% of it is based on nonverbal communication. 38% is based on the way you're using your voice or your tonality, and only 7% are the words that we're using. And so all three of these things are important, and we're going to talk about how we can use all three levels of these communication strategies in order to effectively influence others or motivate someone to take action on a particular request.
What are some of the qualities of the master communicators and persuaders?
Well, guys, I came up with about 5 as I started thinking about what are those things that separate those master communicators from just people using the words or just going about their everyday life. And what I've noticed about the master persuaders is, one, they have a very assumptive attitude. They assume that what they're offering people are going to want, whether it's something in sales or even as something as simple as requesting for a date. So they're very assumptive in their nature. The master persuaders are very flexible in their style of communication. They're kind of like social chameleons that can adapt to the different types of people. I mean, you'd speak differently to a priest, let's say, versus a doctor, or versus your buddies that you go out and watch the sporting events with. So they're very flexible and can adapt their style of communication to meet their audience. So we have to be flexible and speaking to our audience. And here's a really big thing that I think a lot of people who aren't as effective with their communication don't take into consideration. The master communicators are responsible for both the giving and the receiving of the communication. So the master communicators, they take responsibility for the words and the messages that they're sending, but also making sure that it's being sent in a way that's going to be understood by the person they're talking with. And again, being flexible to the style, and we'll talk more on that later on. And they also are very congruent on all levels. So as we talked about those 3 different levels of communication, the master persuaders are confident in sending messages of confidence on all those different levels, or messages of trust or warmth, whatever it may be. And finally, and most importantly, to persuade other people, what the masters do is they get into other people's map of the world to begin moving them into theirs. So they first get into their shoes to then begin taking them into a different location. So those are some of the qualities or characteristics of some of the master persuaders. And again, we're going to break down some of these more in depth as we go through the conversation. One of the golden rules to remember is like attracts like. And the people we are most attracted to or we feel connected to, typically what's happening is on some level we have a congruency on nonverbal communication. Chances are, I bet all of you listening have run across a person you really have never met before, but you instantly felt connected to them. And yet at the same time, you ran across people you've never met before, and for whatever reason, you felt instantly unattracted or kind of turned off to that type of person. And chances are what's going on is there was a mismatch in the nonverbal communication. So one way that we can use nonverbal communication to create or to elicit or influence others is through rapport building. And in NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, we talk about strategies for instant unconscious rapport. And that's so critical, especially with any type of influence, because we're going to act or take action on the requests of people we trust, or we have a rapport with, or a connection with. And so some of the ways that the master communicators use their nonverbal communication is, again, they want to create that image that like attracts like. So they want to subtly begin mirroring and matching the other person's body postures, their movements, the way that they're holding their body. So what mirroring and matching is a technique of subtly matching what the other person is doing with their body. Now, I do want to put a disclaimer out there that this isn't mimicking. It's not making fun of or playing that copy game you did as a kid. But it's subtly matching or creating a mirrored reflection of that person with you. So when they look at you, they say, wow, this guy's just like me, or this woman's just like me. And instantly we start creating that unconscious level of rapport. So now we can also do a thing called countermatching. I'm sure everybody has come across a person who is maybe tapping their finger or they're fidgeting with their leg. Another way that we can match that behavior is maybe by doing something similar. So every time the person is moving their foot up and down, you might move your pen, or you might scratch your hand, or something to replicate that behavior. Now, what ends up happening is we're creating that likeness, and our subconscious immediately gravitates towards that type of person. Now, here's a couple general quick rules. One, we don't want to match or mirror every one of their behaviors. We're only looking for about 50 to 60%, and we want to do things that will resemble, but not mimic what they're doing.
Right,
And
so
also,
the goal is to get them to feel comfortable with you, but not to realize that you're doing this at all.
absolutely, you hit it right on the head. And so, why is this important? Well, one, it creates a feeling of connection in that rapport. And then the next thing it can do is it can lead into what NLP practitioners call pacing and leading. And what we can actually do is, as we start to mirror and match their body posture, we start to create that connection. We can now subtly begin to move them into a different level of openness, or we can begin subtly influencing their behaviors. And you'll notice that you might make a gesture and then they'll respond right to it. I bet everybody has probably seen something like this where there was a woman holding a baby and she's rocking, and naturally everybody standing around is rocking too, but they don't have a baby. Or you see a smoker light up a cigarette, and then all those other smokers around, it's like a chain reaction, they'll light up. Or someone will yawn, and then next thing you know, everybody in the room is yawning. That's an example of pacing and leading. So as we match their body posture, we can begin subtly moving them into different states of being. So real quick, and if there's any questions, I can answer them, but otherwise we'll wrap it up. Why is this important? Well, let's say you're going in to talk with your boss to get a raise, and you notice that his arms are crossed, his legs are crossed, he looks in a really grumpy mood, and all those nonverbal cues are sending out, I'm shut down. You know, the walls are up. That wouldn't be the best time to go in and ask your boss for a raise. Because if you do, chances are he's not going to be receptive to that idea. Typically, people who have their arms relaxed, their legs kind of open, they're sitting in a more comfortable posture, are typically more open to receiving messages. So you might want to go sit in there when you're going to talk with him about the raise and subtly cross your arms like him and have your legs in a similar fashion. And maybe he goes to scratch his head and you might go and, adjust your tie or scratch your chin. And we're subtly matching these types of behaviors. What you can then do is begin changing your behavior. So now you might open up your arms and you'll start seeing them start getting relaxed. You start putting your legs in a more relaxed position. You start leaning forward as if you're very engaged. And what you're going to start noticing is their behaviors opening up too, which is going to increase their receptivity to whatever you're offering.
I know that you teach all of this in corporate programs and individually. How, as a hypnotherapist, how do you use hypnosis to help, or do you use hypnosis to help people learn how to do these techniques. These aren't natural to everybody. Is there a way that hypnosis can help them or their own self-hypnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. Self-hypnosis is critical, especially with any communication. And so what we do at corporations is not only are we training people to get into self-hypnosis for greater motivation, but to integrate these types of techniques into their life. And so for any type of speaking or communication, hypnosis can be used. For instance, even before coming on the show today, I spent about 5 minutes going inside of myself just to get myself prepared and feeling good to allow the best information to come out. And so what we're doing is I go in there all the time, and we created a business coaching course for hypnotists that actually has sessions designed to boost confidence in communication, as well as boosting their ability to integrate these so it becomes a natural part of their behavior. So absolutely, self-hypnosis is a critical part of being able to integrate this quicker and easier than, trying to just apply these things into your everyday life. If your parents are out there wanting to get their kids to take action, go in and begin subtly matching them. Get into that rapport. Also, so everybody can see what I'm talking about in a natural setting, when you go to restaurants, look around and you'll notice the people who are in love or a great connection. They'll be sitting similar. When one will drink, another one will follow very quickly after. And you'll also notice around, just through nonverbal, you can see all those people who are out of rapport or having fights or disagreements. You'll see their bodies are turned, they're not facing each other, they're closed down. And it's a very exciting thing to see, and you could see how this can apply into influencing people in your own world. So create that rapport before going into influence.
John, I think you were about to talk to us about how all these things that you just told us apply to tonality.
Well, absolutely. I mean, going back to the different levels of communication, the next rung down would be the way that we use our voice. And one of the things that makes hypnotists so effective is they can take the quality of their voice and manipulate it around to create very impactful suggestions or sentences or ideas. And a tonality is so important when influencing anybody. And I'll tell you, I learned this the hard way. Ever before I got into learning about hypnosis and NLP and communication, I had everybody's favorite job in the world. I worked as a telemarketer in my teens, and I'm sure everybody loved having me call them all the time. But
Right.
I lived at the time in southwestern Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, and part of our calls were into the city, and part of the calls were out to the country. And what I ended up noticing was, as I saw a tremendous amount when my calls list were in the city, and more of the fast talkers, more of the go-getter type people. But as it went into the country where things were a little bit more laid back, I did awful. And we couldn't figure it out, but there was a really tuned-in manager. He figured it out. He said, what's off here is you are talking too fast for the country type of audience. Right. And it was creating a mismatch. And they would tell me things like, I don't want to listen to any fast talk, or I don't want anything you're offering. But in the city, I had great rapport with everybody I talked to because I was right to the point. Right. And so we have to take into consideration the way we're using our voice to begin adapting like that social chameleon to match that other person. And the two big things you want to listen to are, one, the speed and the volume. So if a person is talking very slowly, you don't want to be zipping around da-da-da-da-da-da because you're creating a mismatch. Or if they talk very softly, you don't want to be a really loud talker and come in because it's going to be overboard for them. And so we also want to take into our tones, just like our bodies, we want to create that rapport by becoming just like them. Remember, like attracts like. So that's how we could use our tonality to begin mirroring and matching and pacing people on. Oh, and one other quick tip. Sometimes we have people who come into our life who are really angry and upset. I mean, if you work in customer service or you ever deal with upset clients or customers, they're going to come in really angry. I can't believe you did this to me. And their voice is high, they're loud volume, very aggressive. If you had talked to that person there and you just said, oh, sir, why don't you just please calm down? What happens? It usually sets that person off, right? Or that person's really angry and there's someone really chippy comes in or happy and go lucky. It really upsets them. So one way that we can get a person to calm down is to match them right where they're at. So you could say, I understand that you're angry. And as we can work through some of the questions and understand what the problem is, Maybe we can come to a better situation or solution for this problem. And you match them where they're at, and you slowly begin to take them to a new place. I hope that makes sense, but it's very powerful in being able to diffuse negative or angry situations with people.
Absolutely. You start out with just as they are and then tone them down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you always want to get into their map of the world first to begin taking them to a different map or a different territory.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All of this has been really clear. Let's talk about some of the reasons why people have a difficult time communicating with others.
Okay, well, we all have inside of our minds representational systems on how we view the world. In NLP, we talk about there are people who are visual. We have visual representation systems, kinesthetic or feeling-based. We have auditory. We have olfactory and gustatory. But the big representational systems the majority of people operate out of are visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. So one of the reasons, or with that being said, some of the reasons why people have a difficult time communicating with others is there's a mismatch in their representational system or the way that they're communicating things. Let's say, for instance, we have a person who's very kinesthetic or very feeling-based, and their spouse or significant other is a very visually based person. You know, the visual person might come up to them and say, check this out. You're going to love the way this big deal looks. It is a very big picture. I can just visualize such tremendous success. And then their significant other, who's a kinesthetic or feeling-based person, say, I don't get it. I don't really get a positive feeling about this. I just can't grasp it. And what's happening is they're communicating their representational system, and there's usually a mismatch. So one person might say, I'll see you later. The next person might say, we'll get in touch. And so if there's a mismatch in those types of styles, there's going to be a lot of conflict in the communication. And so what we want to do is begin listening to the words, listening to the phrases that people use, so that we can begin adapting the language and speaking their language to them in a way that they can really comprehend. So for instance, with a visual person, if you wanted them to do something, you may write that stuff down, give them something to see, something to look at. If you're going to teach a kinesthetic person something to do, you might want to walk them through the process so they can get a feel. If it's auditory, you might want to describe to them the way it's going to sound or the way to prepare it in that way. So we want to match on that level as well. And this is how we can start matching those words and using those as a way, too, to create that rapport, and like attracts like. So when people speak like this, you say, man, this person really gets me. They really know who I am. And it makes it a lot easier for communication.
Can you give us an example? Let's see if you might have an example of someone you've worked with that had difficulty with that and how they turned it around. Do you have any stories about how people have examples of ABK?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, I can even give you a personal example. I'm very kinesthetic based, where my partner, she is very visual. And so she'll go and write down all kinds of stuff for me, and it just doesn't process. I need something to kind of, even right there, I'm talking about the word process. See, we can just listen to language that people are saying, and it's going to indicate what their modalities are. So if a person is saying, I need to grasp it or have something to hold on to, what are they saying? I'm a kinesthetic-based person. That's my main mode. Right. So if Siobhan would come in and say, John, do you see what I mean? It just doesn't click with me in the same way as she says, do you feel what I'm talking about here? Or can you process this? Does this, how does that feel as you hear this? That would resonate a lot more with me. So we both work on adapting our styles to create better communication. And you're going to hear these phrases all the time. I mean, the visual say, I see what you mean. Kinesthetic might say, I need to process this. You'll hear auditory people say, this sounds like music to my ears. Or that rings true with me. And so as we hear those things and can adapt it, we're going to have less errors in communication. It's going to become a lot clearer for each individual. So listen to the words that people use and then feed that type of information back. Some of the most powerful things is using what's called arcing statements. And these are what some of the master persuaders and salespeople use. And what an arcing statement is an acronym that stands for Affirmative Response Conditioning, which is just a really fancy way of getting people to say yes to your request. See, One reason why people sometimes aren't able to influence others is they ask questions that are easy or fun for people to say no to. And what arcing statements are their questions, or they're statements disguised as questions. So, for example, I might say, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" "That's a wonderful car, huh?" "This material is fun to learn, isn't it?" And it has a tag question at the end, but a downward inflection in your voice that implies a yes. So when somebody says, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" you typically just say yes and respond. They weren't really asking you a question. If they wanted to ask you a question, it would say, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" And the tonality at the end would raise. So a standard arcing statement, or the normal one, is going to be having a tag question at the end.
Right.
"You're understanding this, aren't you? You would really love to drive around in that car, wouldn't you?
Wouldn't you? Yeah.
This is making a lot of sense, isn't it?" But if you kept using that same type of arcing statement, the problem is that what we're going to do is people are going to start catching on. So we can reverse it, and the next type of arcing statement would be like a reverse arc, which is, "Isn't it a beautiful day? Don't you just love that dress? Isn't this just exciting to learn about communication?" And again, we're putting the tag question in the beginning this time as a way to kind of vary our style. Remember, if people understand what type of tactics or techniques that are being done, it's going to blow everything, and they're going to realize what's happening, and it's going to shut down. So we want to begin to change these things. And another form of arcing statement is when your client or customer is right, they're right. So somebody might say, "Wow, that hypnosis section was excellent." And I might respond back, "Wasn't it?" Or a customer looking to buy a new car says, "Wow, that car is fast." And the salesperson might say, "Isn't it?" And what these statements are doing is getting a person to say yes. And what the salespeople are doing is any type of yes that they get agreement from the client or the customer is creating a momentum, and it's getting easier and easier and easier to say yes to things that may not be as straightforward or something that they might not be ready to jump into yet. So it's a very powerful way of using your language in these types of tag questions to elicit a yes. For instance, your kids, you might say, "You're ready for dinner, aren't you? You're going to get your homework done right now, huh? Isn't it time to go take action and clean your room?" And so if we use that as a disguised question with a downward inflection, you'd be surprised at the yeses you're going to get from other people. So here's where the magic of those arcing statements come in. I mean, of course, you can get the yes response, but how do the master persuaders use arcing statements to get a person to act on a request? So they use what's called yes sets. And what I was kind of alluding to before our break was every yes that you get going inside of a person, you're creating a momentum. And the more yeses we can get them to say, it's going to increase the likelihood of them saying yes to a future request. So a salesperson, let's say, selling a car, they might see the salesperson, they come up and they say, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" And of course, the person's going to say yes. And then they look at the car and they say, "Wow, isn't that a beautiful machine?" They give a reverse, let's say, and the client, of course, says yes. And they say, "Wouldn't it be so much fun to zip around town in that car?" And of course, they say yes. And they say, "You're now ready to take a test drive, aren't you?" And what they do is after they get 3 yeses, they slip into a request that may not be so easy to say yes to. And so this is a way that we can use arcing statements as a way to create yeses and momentum and then slip in our request in the same type of fashion. It's very powerful. We work with hypnotic clients with this all the time, and it can also work in the other direction. If you wanted to get a no from a person, you could begin creating a no set, which is getting them to say no to 3 even insignificant questions, and then followed up with the question you need them to say no to. So that momentum style works in the opposite way. Now, what's cool is another thing that a way we use words to influence is through the use of truisms. And truisms are very powerful, and I'll explain why. But first, what is a truism? A truism is something that a person believes to be true or something that's undeniably true. And that's why when a salesperson says, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" and the person says yes, that serves as a truism, And what a truism does is it's going to lower down critical factor bypass, or the critical factor or critical analysis. It's going to begin to bypass that thing. And the reason it does is the mind begins to see us as a truth sayer. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure everybody's out there has a person or two in their life that when they give you a certain bit of advice, you know it's coming with a level of authority that they love you and it's the best thing for you. And very little analysis is taken into that consideration when they give you that advice. You know it's a truth. You know they're in there for your best interest. The way we create that same idea in a person's mind is by providing enough truisms or things that they believe to be true and things that are undeniably true. Because what the critical mind is saying is, that's true, that's true, that's true, that must be true too. And so it lowers down its defenses or the analysis. Now, here's something very, very, very powerful. And whether you're a hypnotist, whether you're in sales, no matter what you want to do, you can use this formula I'm about to describe to get people to take action. It's great for sales copy. It's great for doing anything. All you have to do is take some time to think about how to set it up, and it's very persuasive. And here's the truism formula. It's going to be, you're going to say a truism, a truism, a truism, and then a leading statement. So I'll explain. You're going to say three things that are undeniably true, and then you're going to lead it up with something that may not be so undeniably true. For example, I might tell a smoking client coming to see me, yeah, I know that you're here because you tried to quit smoking a lot of times in your past. The mind says that's true. I say, I bet you've probably tried the gum, the patch, just about everything else out there. The mind says that's true. And I bet even at times you felt like, what's the use? I might as well just give in the towel. The mind would say that's true. Now we're going to slip in a suggestion. And you say, this is going to be so much easier because hypnosis is the best way to achieve this change. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and put in two more truisms. You know that smoking is costing you a lot in your health and your money. You know that your friends and family would rather have you become a non-smoker. They would enjoy your company much more. You are ready to now become a non-smoker, and hypnosis is the easiest way. So on this level, we're doing two truisms and then two leading statements. Then we follow it up with one more true statement, and then we lead the rest of the way out there. So I'll go back and summarize. Your first wave is truism, 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 lead. Then you bring in more truisms back. Truism, truism, lead, lead. Then one more truism, and then you can lead the rest of the way. Because what's going on in the mind is saying, that's true, that's true, that's true, and then you slip something in, and then you go right back to another true statement. The mind doesn't have time to analyze it. It just immediately gets accepted as another true thought. Does that formula make sense? Did I break that down okay?
Certainly does.
Yeah.
And please listen to this. This, I'm sure, is being recorded and will be posted. Go back to Change Your Life, Change Your Mind radio show, and I'm sure you could hear that if you needed to get some refresher.
Oh, yes. They can get this information anytime they want to.
Yeah, I think people will be listening to this over and over again, individually, more than once, to get all the content out of this. It's so valuable. That's a fantastic formula, and I can see how that could help people in relationship problems, people dealing with maybe drugs and alcohol. It's almost an interventional kind of technique that would help in dealing with a lot of touchy issues.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's effective in a hypnosis session, a sales letter, and in everyday communication. Mm-hmm. Utilize truisms and slip your suggestions in and then sandwich them between two powerful truths or things that people can't deny. And it's going to go in with like a lightning bolt into the mind.
You mentioned earlier that master persuaders have an assumptive attitude. Explain what you mean by that specifically.
Well, they assume that what they're offering is a person they want. And so here's a really powerful way that we can use assumptions as a way to persuade people to act. Again, I mentioned earlier before that people who ask questions that are easy to say no to typically get a lot of no responses. And master persuaders assume that what they're asking or requesting people want. So here's some examples. If a person was calling and I wanted to book them for a session, I might say, I have a session at Friday at 2 or 3. Which is better? And what I'm doing is I'm giving a person an either or options that I have selected that are right for me. And what it's doing is assuming the sale. So instead of saying a person, you're ready to come in for a session, they could say no to, a master persuader would say, I have a session at 1 or 2, which is best? They assume that what they want, or they want the session, now it's a matter of figuring out the option. Another example in personal life, you may go up to your partner and say, instead of saying, do you want to go to the movies, which could be easy to say no to, you say, there's a lot of great movies playing. Which would you like to see tonight, a comedy or would you like to see a romance? And whenever they make an agreement or pick one of those options, they've agreed to the statement that subtly went in that says, I want to go to the movies. Or if you want to take a person to dinner, you might say, instead of saying, do you want to go to dinner with me? And a more powerful way would be, hey, let's go to dinner. Would you rather have Chinese or would you like Italian tonight? And once they make up that mind, they've assumed that what was being assumed has been solidified and validated. And it's a powerful way to get a person to take action. Parents might say, are you going to do your homework before the commercial break or immediately after?
Yeah, this is an old sales trick. It's don't let them get to say, don't let them make a choice.
Absolutely. And people like to have a position of choice, but we're providing the choices for them. And yet they're happy and we're happy too.
Right.
And a couple quick things real quick before we wrap up, a couple little sneaky ways to get a person to take action. Use the word don't. If I tell everybody right now, don't think of a pink elephant, what do? Immediately think of a pink elephant, right? Here's a way you can get your friends and family really sneaky. You say, hey, honey, whatever you do, don't feel obligated to do this. Honey, whatever you do, don't feel guilty about not taking action. And what happens is when you say that, they begin to feel obligated to do it. And it comes from them. Let's say you have you're going out and you have a sales proposal or you're interviewing for a job and there's 2 candidates. If you wanted to subtly imply a seed of doubt in the mind of the interviewer, you might say, what is it about the other applicants that you only find interesting? What is it about that other proposal that you only find interesting? That word only implies a singular thing that they like. Whereas if I was talking about my proposal, I'd say, as you look at my proposal, look at all those many benefits that comes to your company. What is it about all of our benefits that entices you? You see how you can use those words only, and then when we talk about ours, we want to have many. And so those are a couple little subtle ways that you can use language and words to kind of get people to take action. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. As we learn to use our words, it's amazing how we could take something so common, yet with just some subtle tweaks and some intention behind it, we can make very magical and very persuasive communication.
I know there are a lot of charismatic salespeople out there. What makes these charismatic people so effective?
Well, first off, going back to what you said, it is a lot of content, and everybody can. And I wanted to fill this tower up with a lot, so listen to the replay and go back to it. But understand we got a couple different levels of learning. You know, at first you're unconscious and competent. You don't know what you don't know. Then you become conscious of what you don't know. So now you're becoming more conscious of some of these strategies out there. Then you become consciously competent. So you start having to think about it, but now you're getting competent in using these skills. And eventually, like the master persuaders, it'll go to unconscious competency. And so just keep working on it and weave a little bit into each of your daily life or communication. Next thing you know, it'll become a natural flow as the way you speak and communicate. But what these guys are doing, and men and women who are so charismatic in sales, they're actually hitting on the other aspect that we didn't talk about with communication, which is listening. And they ask the right questions, and then they elicit information about people's buying or decision strategies or their motivational strategies. So what they'll do is, let's say a person is wanting to act on a hypnosis session. I say, have you ever been hypnotized in the past? And they said, yes, I have. I might ask a question to say, well, what was it about that session that got you to take action? And typically people will give then their criteria for decision making. Or in the past when you were very motivated to reduce your weight, what was it about that time that kept you so motivated or act on this? And what we're end up doing is we create their decision or their buying strategy, motivation strategy, and then the master salespeople feed it right back to them. And they're feeding it back on all the different levels. They're matching and mirroring their body posture so they're congruent there. They're feeding it back with the right tonality and speed. They're using the type of words we talked about to match them on their representational level. And then they feed back their exact same wording or strategy, which is going to greatly increase the likelihood of a person taking action. So the right questions will elicit the right information. And then what we want to do is we want to elicit the need and provide the solution. And if we can do that, no matter what we're doing, we're going to be able to manipulate or move a person forward, influence them, persuade them to act on what we're requesting.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, John. You're just a wonderful communicator.